You're listening to Conservation Connection.
Presented by Last Chance Endeavors.
I'm Chance.
I'm Sarah Catherine.
We're a husband and wife team running a wildlife education nonprofit focused on connecting students to their environment.
Each week, here on Conservation Connection, we do just that by introducing you to the groundbreaking science and conservation work that's happening every day across the globe.
We talk to professionals working to protect our planet and ask them about their career,
their current projects,
their wild and crazy stories from the field,
and everything in between.
This episode is a collaboration with the Sun Valley Forum in Sun Valley, Idaho, and was made possible through a generous donation by the Nancy P. and Richard K. Robbins Family Foundation.
The Sun Valley Forum is an intergenerational meeting of forward-thinking professionals that come from a diverse range of disciplines.
These experts are on the cutting edge of what's happening in the fight for our future, and they've all come together at the Sun Valley Forum to share ideas and collaborate on solutions for a greener tomorrow.
Let's get to the show.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to another episode of Conservation Connection. We are here in Sun Valley, Idaho for the Sun Valley Forum, and we're very excited to be sitting down with Rhett Butler, who is the founder and CEO of Mongabay.
Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for making time for us today. Let's just start by, why don't you tell our audience, what is Mongabay?
So Mongabay is a conservation news and environmental science website. We publish in six languages. We're structured with 6 bureaus around the world. We tend to focus on kind of international conservation issues at the intersection of nature. So that would be like forests, oceans, wildlife, the conservation sector itself, and then like marginalized communities, so like indigenous and local communities. And our monthly readership is about 4 million on our website, but then because all of our content's Open Creative Commons license, it means anyone can use our content for free. So we have a lot of outlets that are syndicating us.
That's really cool. And it sounds kind of similar to why we started this show, Conservation Connection, because so much news and media out there is really sensationalized. You know, you have to have a good hook to make your general audience be like, oh, I want to read about that. We spoke with a friend of mine who was doing some research with dolphins, and she was saying in Australia, like, dolphins will basically get sea sponges and like toss them in the air to impress potential mates. And the news there was like, dolphins wear hats to find a mate or something. And so there really is that need for this type of news that just is there to tell the truth.
Yeah, I mean, that's a challenge that I think all media are having to deal with now is you have an audience that's it's constant partial attention. So a lot of people don't really read beyond the headline. And so you have to figure out like a way to hook them, whether it's a sensational headline or, like a ridiculous picture or something like that. And, we've had to navigate that at Mongabay because, that's not our style. We want to really have like that in-depth reader that might drive some impact in the world. But yeah, it's definitely a struggle that I think all journalists have to sort of navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you... were you the kid that grew up and you knew you wanted to go into journalism? You were writing stories when you were little, or did you kind of take a different path to get into this? How did you get to be doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, I'm totally unqualified to do to be doing what I do today. But the reason I started Mongabay was, really out of my childhood. So I had the great fortune of having a mother who's a travel agent and a father who traveled a lot for business. So he had a lot of airline miles. And so we were able to travel as a family growing up. And I always had a special love for reptiles and amphibians.
Yes.
And I felt that the coolest reptiles and amphibians lived in the rainforest. So I always wanted to go to the rainforest. And when I was 12, I had a chance to go to eastern Ecuador, to the Amazon rainforest. And I had an incredible time there. We stayed with a fairly traditional indigenous community, and we go out and look for frogs and hike through the forest. So I had a great time there. I came back, and a few months later, there was a story in the San Francisco Chronicle about this huge oil spill that had happened on the Rio Napo, upriver from Red Bend. And so what that meant is that whole area I visited was now coated in oil slick. And so all I could think about is what had happened to my friends in the forest and the animals. And so that's where it really moved me from being someone who appreciated nature to someone who is really tuned into like what was happening to nature. But then the thing that actually led me to take action was another trip. And so when I was in high school, I went to Malaysia and Borneo and had another just incredible experience in this beautiful forest. I kept in correspondence with the scientists there. So this is before I had access to email. It was letters. And a few months later, the forest was pulped to make paper. So there's like beautiful forest that I visited. It was, completely destroyed. And all, that destruction of that forest, inspired me to do something to try to make a difference. And so when I started in college, I began writing a book about rainforests. And my major was management science, economics. So like math, econ, and business. Had nothing to do with journalism or, or biology or conservation or anything, but it was my passion. And so I worked on this book I got out of school a little bit early, but like throughout college, I spent that extra year where I got out of school, working on this book, finishing it up. And then, I found a publisher, went through peer reviews. Publisher came back and said, we'd like to publish this book, but we don't have the resources to put pictures in it or like nice colored photos. And so to me, that really defeated the purpose of what I was trying to do, which was convey the beauty of rainforests and why we should save them. So I thought, well, I didn't write this book for money. I wrote for impact. And so I decided to post the book on the internet so people could read for free. And I named it Mongabay, after this island off Madagascar. That was a very special place to me. But the reality was I wasn't going to run a website for a living. So I went and got a real job. But I worked on Mongabay on nights and weekends, and it started to get popular. And then in mid-2003, I put ads on the site. And because the site was popular, it started generating revenue that was equal to about half my take-home pay.
Wow.
So I thought, well, maybe I quit my job and pursue my passion. And so that's what I did. And then from that, once I started doing Mongabay full time, that's where I started the news service and everything Mongabay is now known for. So that's the origin of the project.
That's crazy.
I mean, that's really like kind of a Cinderella story of like this passion that just found the right pathway and grew and grew and grew until, I mean, you've been doing it for how many years now? 23
years.
Which, I mean, that's incredible. And it has been nonstop since you took that full-time leap to making it your full-time job. That's been your income, your livelihood, right?
Yeah, it has. I mean, and I haven't taken a day off since 2003, including like, my wedding day, like, I mean, it's, holidays, things like that, but it's because I love what I do and I don't really, I mean, some of it's work, but a lot of it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah. It's kind of what you always hear people say, like when you enjoy what you're doing, it isn't really work. It is, but it doesn't feel like it.
There are parts of it that are work.
Yeah.
Like for me, doing any sort of bookkeeping or taxes for a nonprofit, that is 100% work. But sitting here and doing this kind of stuff or like editing posts and stuff, that doesn't feel like work to me. Yeah.
And I mean, my role has changed quite a lot at Mongabay. So the first, like 10, 15 years, I was a journalist. I was creating content, which is, what I love to do. But I realized that in order to like maximize impact, I would need to focus on other parts of, growing an organization. So I hired a bunch of, journalists who are much better reporters than I am and, focused on, managing the organization and fundraising. And as a result, when I formed the nonprofit, our staff was, 2.5 people. Now we have 80 full-time staff.
Wow.
And we just have a lot more resources and a lot more opportunities for impact.
So are you like sending people on location, sending journalists to cover stories?
So we do both. So we have a lot of frontline reporters who are in the countries we focus on. So we tend to prioritize geographies and markets where we feel like journalism can have a marginal impact. So historically that's meant like not so much Europe and the United States, but places where you have the highest concentration of biodiversity, coupled with the highest degree of threat, or change, and then places where you can have media and journalism. So it's a lot of the world. But we have, about 80 full-time staff now in about 25 countries. But then we have a network of about 800 contributors in about 80 countries. And so we had a moratorium on travel for over 2 years due to the pandemic because we didn't want our journalists to be vectors for disease, especially in these communities that can be quite vulnerable. And so, but it didn't slow us down because we had local journalists who could do the reporting. And so our model isn't like parachuting expats, into other countries. We really rely very heavily on local reporters, to do this work.
In the more than 20 years that you've been doing this work at Mongabay, what changes have you seen in the environment, in the world? I'm sure it's been significant having journalists in all these places and diving into so many topics. I'm sure you've seen a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. So, I mean, like in the environment space, like one of the big things we've seen is the problems are not going away. I mean, they're changing, but a lot of times they're getting worse. And partly related to that is kind of the drivers of environmental degradation have changed. So, I mean, in the, and it depends on the country, but 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, a lot of environmental degradation was driven by people who are just trying to feed their families or feed local markets. But what's happened is a lot of environmental degradation has basically become industrialized. So it means there's like a smaller number of companies or governments that are driving a larger share of destruction. So this is really important because it means there's actually a smaller number of targets for activists to go after. So from that like from the standpoint of companies can drive more degradation as a problem, but it also means that there's a fewer number of entities to target. So it's not a matter of like telling poor people that they have to change their behavior and they can't feed their families. They're just trying to get by, to going after corporations and saying like, if you just change a few things, it can have a dramatic impact in the world. So that's been like another major trend that's important. And I guess another like very significant trend that's really accelerated since the mid 2010s has been the recognition of indigenous local communities' role in achieving conservation or climate outcomes. So, I mean, that's not necessarily what the communities are trying to do, but it's their, it's their management of their traditional territories that is done in a more sustainable way, and means that if you look at where biodiversity and forests and other environmental services exist today, a disproportionate amount of that is in indigenous territories. And so that's kind of like another big thing. And I guess just to name one more would be kind of the rise of technology. So we now have a better sense of, what's happening in the world around us. So it means we no longer have ignorance as an excuse for not taking action.
Right. And if you go back to like the original book, Mongabay, and you were just struggling to get photos of these forests in front of people, I mean, think of now I could pull out my phone and Google it and have similar images in my hand immediately. And that role of technology as connecting us globally and to environments around the world that I will probably never see in person is, I think that's absolutely spot on, that it's absolutely vital as a way of getting information in front of people today.
Yeah, definitely. And then like taking it another level up is you look at like satellite data, which is really useful for looking at change over time. And you can confront companies and say, oh no, we didn't cut down any trees. It's like, well, no, there's actually a record of this by day, from satellites.
Yeah. Every time the satellite passes over, we see there are fewer trees there. Yeah, absolutely. So as somebody who has been eyeballs deep in environmental stories for decades, there's a lot of talk about the importance of positive stories versus the importance of getting realistic, kind of heart-rending stories in front of people. I know that if I were doing what you were doing, I would really struggle to stay positive looking at the kinds of stories that are coming out of just environmental news in general. What do you do to stay positive about what the future of the environment looks like?
Yeah, so I want to kind of unpack that a little bit. So, I mean, one of the issues is I think journalists tend to focus on the negative. So if you have a solution that's 80% effective, most journalists by nature would focus on like the 20% that's like the problem. And so I've been told that Mongabay is, the most depressing site on the internet regularly. So I know it's an issue. And so when we do look at solutions, it's a matter of framing it. So we have to like go into it saying like, we need to, we can still look at the problem, but we want to like look at what real solutions are, and not just greenwashing, because that's a big problem. And actually doing real solutions journalism is quite a bit more difficult than just like focusing on problems, because you actually have to do the due diligence to understand whether this is actually a solution or not. So, that being aside, in terms of how I stay positive, this is not a very helpful answer, but I tend to be an optimist. So like that's like kind of useless for probably like 90% of people. But I do try to, if I see a problem, then I try to look for like, why is this a problem? And like, how can we fix this? And sometimes it's very daunting, but other times it's like, well, there are things that can be done. And often it's a matter of just like aligning incentives properly or getting rid of sort of like perverse incentives. But it is sort of a daily beatdown in terms of just tracking these issues, because there is a lot of the trends are very negative. I mean, there are positive trends, but like overall, it's a pretty dire scenario in a lot of the issues that we cover.
What do you see as the future of Mongabay?
So we are planning to continue to expand in places where we can have impact. And so that's both like language wise, but also geographies. And we're adding new projects to like expand our capabilities. And so we want to meet audiences where they're at. And our audience consists of different kind of user groups. But, one of that user groups tends to be decision makers in whether it's finance or government or at companies, but also in the conservation sector. And so we're doing more data-driven journalism. And so, we've had a program now for about 8 years looking at satellite data, but we'd like to bring in other data sources, whether it's like bioacoustic devices to, evaluate soundscape ecology, to, environmental DNA, to, digging into financial records, so things of that nature. Another way to meet audiences like where they are, beyond language or geography is, the formats and the platforms where they consume content. So over the past 5 years, we've been doing a lot more video, which just reaches different audiences. And so, I continue to see, us evolve with, where those platforms are. So, like 10 years ago, it might've been Facebook. Now it's, TikTok and other platforms. So we just have to be kind of responsive to, where audiences are at, and always sort of have our mind on, how do we actually drive impact through journalism? And I mean, just to clarify, we view ourselves kind of we view ourselves as a journalism organization, not an advocacy organization. But if you want to sort of put an advocacy lens on us, it would be on the topics we choose to cover. So by virtue of covering like illegal logging in the Amazon or the palm oil sector, we're shining a lot of light on areas that a lot of other media outlets traditionally haven't.
Yeah, absolutely. If somebody listening right now was interested in, kind of has a bent towards journalism, but isn't really sure how to break into it or how to make an impact as a journalist, even if they're not, classically trained. You said that you're wildly
unqualified.
Unqualified. That's it. Wildly unqualified for what you do. How would you encourage people to make an impact in this sphere?
Well, I think you just need to start writing. Well, writing, if that's your medium, or like creating videos or audio content, if that's your medium, you just need to sort of like exercise that muscle and build that muscle, and then look for opportunities to write, whether it's as an intern or through a training program. But, once you have, like a blog, or if you're posting on LinkedIn or whatever, you build up sort of like a repository of examples of how you can write. And then you can share that, and that can help you like land opportunities. So for me, I mean, again, I have no background in really anything I do, but, I started by writing and kind of, iterated over time, and, eventually wrote a book, and then, made this website, and then have the sense to be able to evaluate other writers as being, better journalists than me, and then, hire them, and, kind of the rest happened. But in terms of like Mongabay specifically, we do have an internship program. We're launching a fellowship program. So we do have opportunities within Mongabay, and a lot of our interns have gone on to become professional journalists or even work for Mongabay.
Awesome. So if you're listening and you're interested, I'm going to put a link to that. Is there a link on the website that I can find?
Yeah. So it's best to actually go to mongabay.org.
Okay.
So mongabay.com is the platform where we distribute all our content, but mongabay.org is about the organization itself. And so there you'll see an opportunities link, and there's like, that's whenever you have a job opening, we list it there, internships, fellowship program, all that stuff's there.
Perfect. So if you guys want to scroll down to the show notes, I'll drop those links right there so you guys can check out those websites, and you can go straight from listening to this.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conservation Connection.
If you enjoyed our podcast, go ahead and subscribe to make sure you catch every episode that we post.
We'd love to hear from you. So if you want to reach out, go to our website, lastchanceendeavors.com/contact and shoot us an email.
We love questions from our listeners, so if you heard something that you want to know more about, be sure to let us know.
If you've got a minute to spare, leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts will help other conservation-minded people find the show. We'd really appreciate it.
A big thanks to the people working to protect our planet, and a big thanks to you for listening. Don't forget to tune in next week.